Hi, this is Sarah. Before we get started, I wanted to share that the Academy Award nominee for Best Original Screenplay, September 5th, is now on digital. It's based on the true events at the 1972 Olympics and the hostage crisis that changed media coverage forever. Starring Peter Sarsgaard, John Magaro, Ben Chaplin, and Leonie Benesch. You can buy or rent September 5th on Fandango at home now. It's rated PG and from Paramount Pictures. Also, if you DM us in our Instagram or hit us up on Blue Sky, or even email us at biopicapodcaststory@gmail.com. All of that info is in the show notes. We have a couple of free codes to watch the movie at home that we can share. So please do hit us up if you're interested in seeing it. This is an amazing story about the media and about a terrible event that took place at the Munich Olympics, which we did cover in our episode on Steve Prefontaine. He, of course, watched it on television. This is about the people who had to cover this news, and it's an incredible story. So please, as I said, definitely hit us up if you're interested in getting a free download code to see the movie. Thanks so much. Now on with the show. Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah, what movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Harriet, starring Cynthia Erivo as Harriet Tubman, and it's our first feature in Black History Month. And Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of slavery, racism, violence, toxic men, and use of an antebellum ethnic slur for a Black person that starts with an N and has 6 letters. Sarah, I feel like I'm leaving a lot out.
I mean, those are the broad strokes of it. And Rena, can you give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Excellent. And sources used in this episode include Stuff You Missed in History Class, the episode on Harriet Tubman, PBS documentary Harriet Tubman, Visions of Freedom, and the books Night Flyer, Harriet Tubman and the Faith, Dreams of a Free People by Tia Miles, and The Life of Harriet Tubman, Moses of the Underground Railroad by Anne E. Schraff, and an article from Slate called What's Fact and What's Fiction in Harriet.
There was also an article from Bustle on what was accurate or inaccurate in Harriet, and an episode about the Underground Railroad of the podcast Black History for White People. Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about Harriet Tubman and the movie Harriet?
From our friends at Wikipedia, Harriet Tubman, who was born Araminta Ross in 1822 and then died in March of 1913, was an American abolitionist and social activist. After she herself escaped slavery, Harriet Tubman made some 13 missions to rescue approximately 70 enslaved people, including her family and friends, using the network of anti-slavery activists and safe houses known collectively as the Underground Railroad. During the American Civil War, she served as an armed scout and spy for the Union Army. And in her later years, Harriet Tubman was an activist in the movement for women's suffrage. And about the movie Harriet. Harriet is a 2019 film directed by Casey Lemons, who also wrote the screenplay with Gregory Allen Howard. It stars Cynthia Erivo as Harriet Tubman, also features Leslie Odom Jr., Joe Alwyn, and Janelle Monae in supporting roles. The film received several accolades and nominations, particularly for Erivo's performance. So she garnered nominations at the Academy Awards, the Golden Globes, the Screen Actors Guild. She also casually co-wrote a song that appears at the end of the movie. And she and the co-writer Joshua Brian Campbell received Oscar, Grammy, and Golden Globe nominations for the song. This was a success in that the budget was $17 million and the box office was $44 million. And I just want to add a quick little wiki wormhole that I went down researching the director, Kasi Lemmons. So she started off her career as an actress. You may remember her as Jodie Foster's roommate in Silence of the Lambs. And she became a director as well. She directed the film Eve's Bayou and probably future episode about Whitney Houston, I Want to Dance with Somebody, among many other movies and TV shows. She also did the miniseries about Madam C.J. Walker, the first female self-made millionaire, which stars our favorite person on the planet, Octavia Spencer. But it is a miniseries, so I believe that it tragically wouldn't qualify for our show. I also want to add that she is married to Vondi Curtis Hall, who plays the preacher in this movie. They've been married since 1995. He's also a director. I'm like in love with these people randomly. So sorry, that just wanted to throw that out there that we have a unique setting in a long working Black woman director and co-writer in this. I thought that was super interesting to find out because I really like Vondi Curtis Hall, and I got really excited when he showed up in this movie, and to find out that he was married to the director, and there's more to come involving the Lemmons Hall family. So just stand by for that.
So up top, we would like to state firmly that slavery was America's original sin and beyond doubt the worst thing ever to happen in this country.
And I am going to just ask you to make sure that you are taking into consideration in that statement the time that Bob Dylan went electric at the Newport Folk Festival when you say that it is the worst thing to ever happen in this country. We open with some Terrence Blanchard music. And I made a note, I'll watch someone flush a toilet set to Terrence Blanchard music.
Yeah.
I will watch anything happen set to his music because it's evocative and beautiful and it puts you right in a place. And there's a way that he gets inside of like human pain through his compositions that's so extraordinary, and it puts you right in a place. And we open there with them very concisely showing us how Harriet, who is currently named Minty, that is the short version of her name, is in the midst of one of her fainting spells.
Her fainting spells were caused by an incident when she was about 13. I'm saying this because sources differ on Harriet Tubman's year of birth, where an overseer threw a metal weight at her head.
That's a really nice thing to do to a kid.
Yeah, she had a dent in her forehead after that, and she was subject to fainting spells, and she very much wanted to learn to read once she was free. And there's been speculation that the reason why she was unable to learn to become literate could have to do with that having that weight thrown at her head caused brain damage that not only led to these fainting spells, but also may have hurt the part of her brain that handles literacy.
This flashback also sort of lays out some of the stakes. I kind of love the way this movie thrust me right into situations where I was like, I don't know what's going on right now, because we see her being separated from family members. And what we do find out happens is that her sisters were sold at a certain point and her family was just divvied up because that's how we did things. We find out that her husband, who is a freed man, has a letter from a lawyer who's saying that he and Harriet can be married and free together.
What it's about is that under the stipulations of the will of the man who originally owned Harriet's family, her mother should have been freed at 45, and through a series of legalese things, she and her brothers and sisters should all be free. But they're like half the slaves on this plantation.
I could not track. And I think that that's probably the point. The justifications for all of like this keeping of people that was going on specific in this movie, just, you know, the sort of convenient theories about why or why not they should be allowed to have their freedom at a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
It really, like, the end of the day, it's because it's bullshit.
Well, yeah, they should have all been free, period.
It's unjustifiable, and you see the lengths that people go to, especially in this family where they seem to think of themselves as pretty great to their slaves. Yeah, which they're not, just because they own people. Yeah, like, doesn't matter how great you are to them, you call them your property and you can sell them. We see, you know, that they're able to have a church service on Sundays, and that the master of the house so generously gives them gravy for their food on Sundays.
And he thinks he's just great for it. And my initial reaction to this preacher, who IRL is married to the director, was, this preacher sucks because he's preaching obedience to your masters. And I'm like, this guy is a few steps away from Samuel L. Jackson in Django Unchained. Like, he's part of the problem. But of course, I also know that, like, it was illegal in many places for slaves to learn to read. They really didn't want them reading the Bible, to read all the things that the Bible says about about seeking freedom from slavery. So if they heard from a preacher, it would be a redacted version or cherry picked. They did not want them reading the actual Bible.
You see how Harriet runs up against what she has been told to do spiritually versus what she is actually doing as an active human on earth. There's like so much sort of nuance of the culture of slavery and what it was like to be a slave in this movie that I really appreciated. It just shows the hierarchical issues that people dealt with.
But you had a note here about Vonte Curtis Hall.
I don't know how to introduce this topic, so I'm going to attempt to introduce it in some way. Again, like from the perspective of like you and I, two people very unqualified to talk about this, but Harriet Tubman is one of the closest things we have in real life to a living, breathing Marvel superhero.
Agreed.
This woman, what she did, what she accomplished in her lifetime, what she achieved here. She's Batman, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I always go back and I kick the guy who didn't even medal at the Munich Olympics, which I'm going to do again this week, Steve Prefontaine. We had 2 movies in 1 year about Steve Prefontaine. We have like 20 billion Wyatt Earp movies. Again, 2 that came out in 1 year. So I just like, I guess I couldn't help but notice how front-loaded this cast is with very talented people who've been working for a very long time in the film industry.
Mm-hmm.
After I'm asking the question about why don't we have 100 different versions of Harriet Tubman's story that tell different versions of her life and different points, because at the end of the movie, when they showed her, you know, showing up to rescue slaves in the South in the Civil War, like a frickin' baller, fearlessly just continuing to go to this part of the country where she is hated and doing amazing things. We could do probably like a whole Saving Private Ryan style movie about this one mission.
Yeah, and I guess spoilers on things I'm going to have issues with later. And you know, the last thing I listened to on my way home was the podcast Black History for White People, and one of the hosts was talking about white feminism. So I have to hold that in my head when criticizing the work of a Black female director. But one of my issues with this film is that they're in the person of the Broaduses, the white family that owned Harriet Tubman, I thought they got too much screen time, especially when I learned that the character played by one of the ex-Mr. Taylor Swift's, Joe Alwyn, is a composite, and there were like 8 children in the Broadus family, but basically their name is spelled differently depending on which source, and they disappear from the story after Harriet gets out and gets her family out. And it's like, rather than see this story of this conflict with her and this one white guy who didn't exist, which maybe it's some law of filmmaking or screenwriting about needing a central conflict, but just like getting tracked down in general is a conflict. I'd rather see her friendship with John Brown and see how a white man being an actual ally in that time, what that looks like, and her decision to not go to Harper's Ferry. I'd like Frederick Douglass to have more screen time.
I agree with you. I found that the movie ground to a halt every time we went back and hung out with that family. I was like, I don't care about any of these people. I don't care that he's upset that his slaves are leaving. I don't care about like anything that happens to them, like that they owe money. I would much rather, I know why they're there. You do need that antagonist and everything, but I just, like, I was so interested in everything that was not involving that family.
And I
was like, I don't care about these people and what happens to them. Like, fuck them.
I don't want to see these white people. I don't care about them. And we see that the Broaduses are a family in economic decline, and I don't care that they're poor rich people.
I didn't care about them. And like, I guess like I started thinking about like Clarke Peters and how Clarke Peters, like you've watched The Wire.
Yes, and we're about to have a talk about me being an idiot and me being wrong. And there are reasons why I am the history person and you are the film person. And when we say I'm the history person, what we mean is Sarah takes care of the 21st and 20th centuries, and I take care of all the other centuries. So, I saw Clarke Peters, and he's so good in this that he only looked vaguely familiar to me. So I thought, he looks a little bit like Morgan Freeman. I've seen him somewhere. Oh, I'm going to be clever and say, oh, it's that guy they hire when they can't get Morgan Freeman. And then you said, do not besmirch the magic of Clarke Peters, which is way ahead of here in our notes. And I realized, oh, it's Freeman from The Wire.
Yeah.
And he had been doing such a good job that I didn't recognize him. But yeah, I was wrong. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but also, I mean, I think like Clarke Peters, so I've seen him on the street in New York, and you know, you live here long enough and you see famous people all the damn time. Mm-hmm. And most of the time it elicits a, oh, hey, that's neat. And I went out of body when I saw him. Because I so love him on The Wire.
He's so different in every role.
I was watching this and I was thinking like how he does physicality really well. Like you can read his body really well when he's working. I feel like it's on like a really high level with him. Mm-hmm. In the same way it's on a really high level with Bryan Cranston. And then I started thinking like, why isn't anyone in the Clarke Peters business? Like, why didn't The Wire lead to a Clarke Peters like Breaking Bad type series? I know like it's the caucasity of things.
Why couldn't Clarke Peters have been Walter White?
Exactly. I just wish we were better. I wish we were better. I don't know how else to put it, and I don't know if there's a more naive way to put it. Oh. But I was like, why am I not seeing all of these people more often? It's not fair. I was like low-key pissed off about that the entire time I was watching this movie. I'm a child. I sound like a child right now, but you know. So yeah, so he's there playing her father, and he also they ask if she can get married and be free, and
she's already married. It's not a legal marriage. I think they'll have done what was called jumping the broom, where they would have a party and the bride and groom would jump over the broom together and the members of the community would celebrate, but it wasn't a legal marriage if one or both people were enslaved, and it could be broken up by the owners at any time, just like they could sell your children away from you at any time.
Once again, giving people gravy on Sundays does not make up for the fact that you own these people.
Yeah, I'd rather have my kid than some gravy, which is a situation that Harriet's mother deals with not one, but 3 daughters. She wants her children to be free. So her husband, John Tubman's choice in marrying an enslaved woman, he must have really been in love, because the rule was that if the mother was enslaved, the child was property of the owner. Whereas if, for example, a free black woman had a child with an enslaved black man, it was not born a slave because it came out of the body of a free woman.
This is so insane, all of these stupid rules, and like, what are we doing? The plantation owner is like, oh, we're gonna be dicks about this. You can show me all this stuff, but no, it's not happening. I own her mother, I own whatever comes out of her, the end. And then he uses the hard N, and and everyone is just like sitting there like, and he rips up the letter and is like, sorry, this isn't the way it works. And Cynthia Erivo's face is so bananas. Like, the expressiveness of her face throughout all of this is just, it's so, like, the whole movie, like, this is such an amazing performance from her. And it's devastating.
Well, she is someone who's finally, like, getting hers as the star of Wicked, but it does occur to me that she has to paint herself green to get equal billing with Ariana Grande.
Well, here's the thing. I don't know if you've seen Wicked yet. It's an emotionally exhausting movie, but she plays that role like it is damn Hamlet. It is an incredible performance, how hard she owns that movie. Anyway, so thank you for explaining to me again how this system works, such as it is. I'm sure that they have loopholes within the loopholes as well. And if you don't like something, then you can always just rip up the letter. After Harriet runs away upset about this, and Joe Alwyn comes to sort of comfort her, or something, that he does point out that God doesn't listen to black people, which, awesome, you're a great guy.
Because we have been brought to expect this by seeing less truthful portrayals of the antebellum South, that he's going to turn out to be the sympathetic slave owner, because there must have, and no, they're all rotten.
What's fun is that he seems to think that he's very much an ally, because he points out that she's his favorite slave, and then he follows it by explaining that having a favorite slave is like having a favorite pig. It's kind of like having a pet that you treat like shit. It sounds like it's sort of like the best case scenario here in terms of that dynamic. And Joe Alwyn is pretty like a bitch.
Yeah, so he's a composite, and I did find myself thinking that I'm kind of disgusted at myself for finding him handsome in this. Fortunately, this movie also stars Leslie Odom Jr., who is much handsomer than Joe Alwyn.
Yes, he is.
So we get this sense periodically that Gideon is attracted to Harriet, and Mary Chestnut, a diarist who was married to a man quite high up in the Confederacy, is quoted in the Ken Burns Civil War documentary saying that on every plantation you would see mixed race, which is not the word that she uses, but that on every plantation you would see mixed race children who were the result of the white slave owners impregnating their female slaves. She doesn't quite say how often this was due to rape, and I should have put rapiness into the trigger warning. I think that one of the ultimate evils of slavery was that people could produce a child and not see it as their child, but as property to be sold, that they could look at this human being who might have their features repeated on it and not feel love is horrifying. I have the smallest violin ever that I just stomped on for slave owners' wives who had to look at these reminders of their husband's adultery. But the degree of dehumanization in this is baffling. You see this later in the film where there is a light-skinned young woman, and we will just stick a pin in that.
So at this point, Master of the house dies, and we go to his funeral.
He dies just like she prayed for, and his son heard her praying.
Awkward. And he's like, yeah, I know whose fault this is. Although he did just say that God doesn't listen to the prayers of Black people. Racists always find a way. I shouldn't be concerned. So he starts putting up flyers saying like she is for sale, and she realizes like she has to get out of there, and she communicates this to family and her husband, who says, I'll go with you. And she's like, you can't come with me, because if they catch you, you will be made a slave again. And she also communicates this her song. The way that they use music here, she lets them know, I am leaving, and everyone gets it. And I love hearing her sing, and will take any excuse to do so.
The way that they would sing the songs was kind of a code, and when they would sing them. And she draws a heart in the dirt floor as a signal of goodbye at one point. And when she goes to her father, he says to her, like, go to Reverend Green Church. And he gives her this, like, wooden carving of his head. Her father was free, and he was some kind of, like, master woodsman with forestry. But I feel like that's like, oh, it's the 1840s, and photography is really expensive. So here's this, like, small, hand-sized carving of my head. I like that he could do that for her. And he tells her, she's like, but Daddy, he's always preaching obedience. And he just tells her, go to Reverend Green Church. And it turns out that, wow, Von D. Curtis Hall was under deep cover. Like, if he were preaching what he really thought, he would be dead.
He gives her solid survivalist advice that I would recommend everyone just kind of like put in their back pocket, which is listening for water so you know what direction to go in. So he tells her to follow the river, but if she can't see it, then to listen for it. And it will help guide you and know which direction to go in, looking for the North Star. This is good information in case your mom becomes your Girl Scout troop leader, or you're in a plane crash. And she starts her escape, and she almost gets caught and is on this bridge over rushing water. And Joe Alwyn's telling her bullshit. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to do this. I'm going to let you be married. And I'm like, don't believe him. I was yelling at the screen. Do not believe him. He's the devil. He is a liar. And she, like a badass, jumps off that bridge, and she lives.
So this never happened. In the real life, when Harriet Tubman first tried to escape with two of her brothers, and they turned around and went back after 2 weeks. She then escaped again on her own. This dramatic scene never happened. The Broadduses just disappear, as they should. They're lucky that their names are spelled a bunch of different ways, so that, or I don't know if they changed their names so that, like, people don't come up to them and say, oh, your ancestors owned Harriet Tubman? I hate these people. So this scene never happened. It was way less dramatic, but still, it's like she escaped to freedom, and then she finds this cart and jumps in the back. And at some point, the farmer knows she's there and says, "You better get out now."
It just like, I kind of like that position of like, I don't want to get involved in this because, who wants to get involved in that? Like, well, if someone's hiding out my stuff, like, please just go. Just get out. Like, I don't want to do a police report. Like,
she looks really wrecked here because she's been, and they do a good job with getting the clothes the slaves are wearing to look suitably bedraggled, but also showing when they're trying to look nice. You don't see any, except for Janelle Monae, you don't really see any costumes in this that make you go, wow, but that feels like real life. It feels lived in. We aren't seeing future wives of the Gilded Age buying the first season from House of Worth. Which
I appreciate, because I would say that the costumes are kind of an achievement in that I wasn't paying attention to them.
She eventually turns up at the riverside and she looks very bedraggled, and one of the sailors throws a blanket around her and tells her, like, basically, you look like a runaway slave.
We meet, like, the one decent man that we see in Act 1 of this movie, and that is Garrett, who somehow she finds him. I don't understand how anybody ever found each other ever. Like, basically before cell phones. He takes her to the border of Pennsylvania and gives her a photo of William Still, who is Leslie Odom Jr.
One of the things that this movie does is it fudges the timeline on the fugitive slave law for dramatic purposes. It has it happen later than it did, so I believe the fugitive slave law wasn't yet in place when Harriet escaped, but it already was sooner than it's shown in this movie.
I don't think I fully appreciated how terrifying the Fugitive Slave Act is.
But I love that she does this little jump over the border and then looks at her hands.
Yeah. And the cinematography in this movie is beautiful.
It is. It's gorgeous.
She has that moment where she holds up her hands and almost, like, you see her almost being like, let me capture this moment in my mind.
She was thinking, these are the hands of a free person.
She's out in the world in Pennsylvania and she's seeing Black people just walking around. And a nice man gives her an apple and tells her she should walk like she has a right to.
We see Independence Hall way off in the background. She goes to meet Leslie Odom Jr. as William Still, and I hadn't read enough when I watched the movie. I did my reading after, so I thought, oh no, like, he is going to turn her in. Why is he writing all this stuff down? But I was wrong. William Still is a real person who did take these records.
I was excited to see him because I love him. And then also, like, we find out here that she went over 100 miles by herself on foot, which is bananas. And I love when someone finds a nice way to, like, get you a backstory. By having this character do his real thing and get her real story written down, we get Harriet's full backstory.
And that is how we learn about the overseer who threw a metal weight at her head.
He helps her find a place to live, and it's Janelle Monae's boarding house. Welcome to the show, Janelle Monae.
Janelle Monae is one of the most gorgeous creatures on earth.
She is just divine. She lets her know, like, I own this house. I was born free. She's seeing, like, Black people can own things and can have homes and can live in the world. Janelle also tells her that she smells terrible, and Harriet's all, hey, you know what? I smell because I just got myself here. You have no idea what I have been through. And she apologizes, and they become friends. We cut to a year later. She has a job. She wants to get involved in the movement to bring more people north. She is sensing that her family is in trouble. And Leslie Odom Jr. is like, you have to learn how to read to do this work if you're going to be going back and forth. Like, it's getting very tricky. There's a lot of laws they're trying to pass. They're talking about the Fugitive Slave Act to appease the South. Like, we're going to turn every person in America into a bounty hunter to appease the South, because that always works, appeasing maniacs. So he's like, no, you're not ready to take on these missions. They are too dangerous. And instead she goes to Janelle Monae and says, you need to help me look like a free woman. She teaches her about bowing and courtesies and things like that. And then she gives her a pistol.
This was so hot, the two of them standing there with the pistol.
I was like, where's my Thelma and Louise remake with them? Or something where is my justification to see Janelle Monae and Cynthia Erivo holding a pistol together again? The movie. And so she goes for it. She gets on a train and goes. Just the idea of going back into a place where you could be put back into being owned by people is, to me, like an act of insane bravery.
She ran over 13 missions to rescue enslaved people from the South, and this includes after the Fugitive Slave Law is passed, where she has to bring them 500 miles up to Canada instead of the original 100 miles.
So she is going to go try and get as much of her family as possible. And we cut back to Gideon's family.
And they are just the worst because, they have fallen on hard times. So, of course, their solution is to sell some people.
I mean, what else can you do? His mother is a real piece of work and says that she doesn't want to sell any people because their status in the community is dependent on their ownership of those Black people, which I got nothing for these capitalist pigs. And she first goes to get her husband. He is really happy to see her, thought she was dead, and is like, here's the thing with the I thought you were dead. I met someone else and got married and she's pregnant.
Okay, so my first reaction to this is, what the hell? It's been a year. That's how much time is supposed to have passed. It's been a year. So if she's pregnant and you already know, at the point where you started seeing this woman, it was less than a year. And then I thought, I really have no right whatsoever to judge people in this situation.
No, but I mean, it does have like he met her at a memorial service energy to it.
It's just more evidence that men are completely helpless without us, especially once you've already had a woman to deal with your stuff for you. They can't do squat without us. That's what's going on when a man remarries that fast.
This scene is agonizing because these are both very good actors. And I wanted this scene to be over as quickly as possible. And it kept going. Not because the movie dragged or because it was overwritten or anything. And I felt such discomfort and compassion for both of these actors, which means that they were doing a really good job playing these real humans, because it's like they both, and the writing in this scene is very good too, because they both get their points across and it's pretty clear like why this happened and like where like the tension that is ultimately unresolvable here comes from. And I just was like, I got to get out of here. I feel like I am watching a very bad breakup happen at a table next to me in a restaurant, and I don't know what's going to happen, but we need to go.
She says that she sent word back, and he says that by that,
he really like let his feelings resolve themselves quickly. Although, I mean, this is different, but not unlike the way we talked about how like, having kids back in the day was a numbers game.
Mm-hmm.
like you had to have enough so some of them would survive. I'm guessing like maybe it's kind of the same situation with your partner. Like you don't have time to mourn. Like there's shit to do.
Well, or that he really wanted a family and he could have a family with someone who was free. And he wanted that. No, I'm just going to chalk it up to that men are helpless without us. Especially the ones who've already been married. And note, Harriet Tubman did remarry eventually after the Civil War, so she took her time finding another man. And he was 20 years younger than her. So nicely done, Sister Cougar.
Oh, so she goes to see her family, and there's so many of them who want to go, and they are all in so much danger of being sold, of, just the general like day-to-day danger of being enslaved and being owned by people. And this was a point in the movie where like the movie kind of takes a turn here where it becomes that cat and mouse chase. I didn't care for that. And we talked about that, like just in terms of having a bad guy. I don't really know what the fix for that is.
I'd rather see a caper about all the people she gets out and all the like hair-raising adventure. And normally we criticize things for being too episodic. So I don't know if there's a way to do that without being episodic. And we get a little bit of it when she meets up with this character named Walter, who's kind of complicated, and we'll get to him. But I want to see like their partnership. Because he's kind of been an amoral person, to put it nicely.
And we have like the breakout of a bad guy in Gideon, who is now like obsessed with the idea of tracking down these slaves who have escaped. And we meet Walter.
He offers to help track down runaway slaves. And when he offers his services to Joe Alwyn, he says, I cover every service from A to Z, including, I think there was one starting with an S, and tracking. But this character kind of winds up being, again, if you're someone who's into Joseph Campbell, which I'm not, sort of the trickster, but he says, I know big or long. And and there is a case that there possibly were free blacks who helped track down runaway slaves.
It's just complicated. And this actor, this character, Walter, who eventually runs afoul of Joe Alwyn and his crew because Harriet and her family escape while he is supposed to be watching them. He is played by an actor named Henry Hunter Hall, and he is Vondi Curtis Hall and Casey Lemon's son.
One of the things we see is he is very talented. He shows Joe Alwyn this gorgeous sketch that he's done of Harriet. I enjoy watching him because he goes from being on the evil side of amoral to being Harriet's left-hand man.
I was really worried when that happened because I was like, oh no, is he going to betray her? But he didn't.
He finds this character, Bigger Long, who is a free black runaway slave tracker, and they're just like one-upping each other on being awful people. The reward is $300, which we've been told that the whole farm is worth $5,000, and that the slaves lost are worth $2,000. So he tells all of the people he's rounded up that he's going to keep $200, and the rest of them can split the remainder. And then Joe Alwyn asks him, "What's an ugly bastard like you going to do with $200? And he says something like, fuck every white whore until I can't remember whether it's Christmas or Easter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's like he kind of enjoys that he can say that.
And good for him for saying that, I guess, or
But
something. I don't know.
Walter has tracked them down, but what he sees is he sees Harriet stop and pray and change her plan and walk into the water. And this has an effect on him. He goes back to Bigger Long, the man he has described previously as practically kin, and says, I lost them, and of course he gets slapped down. I appreciated that this character, Walter, is changed by what he sees, where he sees this woman where it appears that God is telling her something. Because I have spoken before about how the thing that I really hate in movies that I find requires more suspension of disbelief than I am willing to give in this era that we're in, especially, but really any time, is where a character makes a big speech and it changes hearts and minds. And that's because we have lived through occasions where someone we admire has made this gorgeous speech and we hear it and we're like, how could hearing this not utterly change the people we deplore, hearing it and make them say, oh, we were wrong, this is right. And that just doesn't happen. The only thing that can change a person is experiences.
Yeah, I also appreciated that and agree. And we have here too, like a really great montage set to anachronistic music of Harriet rescuing people
to Nina Simone.
Yeah, it's so good. And also we're seeing that Joe Alwyn is going to stop at nothing to get his slaves back. And we see that everyone is talking about this person, Moses, who is coming down and taking slaves. And of course, they're all giving the credit for this to a white man. They're thinking it's a white man in blackface, because heaven knows a woman or a black person could never be doing all of this. It has to be a white man. But then someone's like, no, it's Minty. It's Harriet Tubman.
It's this character, Bigger Long, who is a guess at something that could have existed, but not a real person.
They insert the Fugitive Slave Act being passed here, and we see freed slaves and people who are fugitive slaves, because we all know that, people are really discerning when they bounty hunt on behalf of the US government, and they wouldn't accidentally do harm to someone who didn't deserve it based on the color of their skin, because we're not garbage in America. We've never been garbage. And they find out that Harriet has been staying at Janelle Monae's house, and she is beaten to death, and it's pretty upsetting. And Harriet ultimately escapes to Canada, but then we also see her return to Auburn, New York.
Yes. She's in Auburn, New York. She has learned that her sister has passed, so we see her in mourning. And then, welcome back to the show, William Seward. We previously saw you in Lincoln, so this is a character returning. And I looked up, did William Seward maybe have a blink and you'll miss it moment in Tennessee Johnson? But I don't believe he did. So this is our second William Seward on record.
Can we get the Jurassic Park juice to bring him back? Because he was a governor and senator from New York who actually stood up to the federal government, and then became, of course, the ambassador and worked with Lincoln. We also meet Frederick Douglass for a moment here, and she's saying, I'm going to go get my parents. And we go back to hanging out with the White Dicks.
And at some point in here, there were a couple other, I guess they're supposed to be younger brothers or a younger sister of Gideon. I don't care. They're all terrible. And there's some scene where they're all gathering around and all the awful white people are like, you Broduses should pay us since your slaves ran off with our slaves. And so the actress playing Mrs. Brodus is the country singer Jennifer Nettles of Sugarland. And I noted here that either she is not doing a great job at being her character's lawyer, or the point of her whole speech is that there is no defense for people owning other people. Because she finishes with burn her at the stake like Joan of Arc.
That was wild to me, that Joan of Arc pull. It was just wild, and also like I haven't zeroed in on it, but there's something like meta level brilliant about the casting of Jennifer Nettles in this role. There's something. It'll come to me in the night.
Walter turns up, and the character just has this sort of dashed how he's dressing. He has this like hat with a raccoon tail on it, and he offers his services to Harriet, and he makes her the exact same pitch that he made to Gideon Brodus. In particular, there's something about his delivery of this speech where he tells her, they say you talk to God, and he talks back, and I've got some explaining to do. He even looks a bit like him. He gives me these like off the wall era young Michael Jackson vibes, but especially when he makes this offer to help Harriet, he reminds me of Michael Jackson saying, "I'm not like other boys" in the Thriller video.
This is so interesting, because I would not have gotten there, but I can see the young Michael Jackson in him now that you mention it.
Like off the wall Michael, not even Thriller Michael.
So while all this is going on, Harriet is gathering up her family from this estate and surrounding areas. Walter has procured her a cart to bring them back on, and she's like, this will have to do. And
he says, just his delivery is so good, we're going to need a bigger cart. So sure enough, he sticks up a cart being driven by some white guys so that they'll have a bigger cart. Because when she goes to the church with her family to hide them, there's more people hiding downstairs.
They're leaving, and they come up against this gang of men hunting for them, and all of them hide underneath the corn in the back of this cart.
So previously they've found this girl who is running away and begs them, and so she says, my master's about to kill me. And then as they are driving out, driving the cart, this girl is quite light-skinned, and she has switched clothes with Walter. And she's like, I don't know if I can do this. And Harriet has told her, think of how many times you've seen your master just live in his skin, which is great advice. And this girl is now dressed as a man, and like she can pass. And she tells all of these racists what they want to hear, and they're about to check the cart when someone asks her, oh, do you know Luther Grant? And she says, he's my father. And this reminded me of, in espionage, or at least I've never been involved in espionage, but in movies about espionage, one of the things that they say is, if you have to make up a story, mix truth in with fiction as much as you can, so that they can't tell. And I think that also helps give a convincing delivery. And he says, you look just like him. And she says, he's my father. And I don't think she's lying at all. Like, this is going back to that thing of, you own your children and don't see them as human. What's wrong with you? because, yeah, of course she looks like him.
Like, I'm glad they didn't, but I couldn't believe they didn't still look in the truck, the cart. I was like, what a bunch of losers you are.
They invoked the old boy club. Of course they don't check. She said exactly what they wanted to hear, and then that she is the son of this man they all know.
Yeah, it was an amazing play, and they played it perfectly. It was just to me, I was like, this is just kind of funny how bad they are at this.
I'm not surprised they lost the war.
And then they get through that, and I wrote, for God's sake, keep moving, do not stop. But they are just waiting for Walter to show up with the boat, and he gets there. She tells him to take everyone to freedom, and she is going to stay back and confront Gideon. She gets into a standoff with him and the slave hunter, who then Gideon shoots because he's about to shoot Harriet and kill her. And he's like, I told you to take her alive.
Yeah, and this just shows that no matter how badly you suck up to people who are against you, they will never be impressed enough to treat you like one of them.
She gets into a standoff with Gideon enough so that he drops his gun, but his gun shoots him in the hand. And I'm like, of course it did, you racist trash loser. You shot yourself in the hand.
Wait, I thought that Harriet shot him in the hand.
I thought he dropped... maybe she did. I thought when he dropped his gun, it shot back at him.
No, I thought she shot him in the hand. I'm really getting confused now. But anyway, he's shot in the hand, and she picks up the rifle even though she already had a gun. So, good on her.
And I made a note here, and I don't think the why is important, but let's just say I was having a conversation with someone earlier this week about how once you have someone on their knees in the forest and you're alone with them, and you have to kill them, right? Like you can't not kill them.
She really should have killed him. And because again, she makes a big speech when we know nothing changes people's minds. But
sometimes the big speech, though, is about people witnessing it, which also doesn't work in this case.
Or I think it's about scaring him into giving her the last word, which I'm sorry, this guy is just such a dickwad. He would yell over his shoulder at her if she left him alive, just so he could feel like he got the last word in.
I think, like, if you are taking someone out into the woods with the intent to kill them because they are a threat to your life, you can't let them live. Putting, like, Joe Alwyn, I know you work hard, but it's also like you against Cynthia Erivo. Like,
I'm sorry, putting face in a vest.
I mean, as I said, he's so pretty, but it's just like the character isn't particularly interesting, and he's up against Harriet Tubman. Like, sorry, not going to be interested in you. She leaves him with his bloody hand and takes his horse, which was pretty baller.
But Walter is already sailed away, so how does she get back to upstate? And I'm assuming this doesn't make sense. I do love the red velvet blazer that she has on here, though.
Oh, this whole look was so fire, but I was also like, this is not a good look for what you're doing. It's very bright and identifiable. It's not good for forest work, but it's beautiful.
There's something about like 19th, right? It's this like 19th century with a menswear edge and holding a big gun. It's very hot.
Yeah, she looks like a badass.
That red velvet blazer should be her superhero uniform.
Yes. And we see this epilogue where we find out about the Civil War thing, which I was like, I want a whole movie about this. This is interesting. We find out that she lived until she was 91 years old, and she was very engaged in, of course, the abolition movement, but also in women's suffrage and also in protection of the elderly. And I just was like, what an exquisite human being. What a fascinating person.
And she married again, and they adopted. I guess that she might have been too old to have children by the time she found someone. But that is lovely that she took her time on moving on, and then she found a very nice man who was 20 years younger than her.
Good story about a good person, but definitely like some of like the added stuff took away from the real.
Choice dialogue, some lines in this that I loved when Harriet says, "I'm gonna live free or die." When Janelle Monae says, "Yes, I'm a woman, yes, I'm Negro, and yes, I own this place." Then, we gonna need a bigger cart. And also, I asked God how a sickly little boy could think he owned me. And Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
I'd be happy to. We rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively interesting and important to most films, but specially tailored to the issues specific to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
Yes! So, for outward appearances, makeup, and hair, I gave it an 8. For acting and casting, gave it an 8. For passage of time, I gave it a 6. For costuming, I gave it an 8. For quality of the script, I gave it a 6. For accuracy, I gave it a 4.5. For storytelling, I gave it a 6. For production value, I gave it a 7. For production, direction, decision-making, I gave it a 6. And for do we care, I think I was over-generous, but given how much we hate Joe Alwyn, but I gave it a 7 because I cared a lot about Harriet freeing people. Your turn.
So I gave it outward appearances, makeup, and hair, I gave it a 9. Acting and casting, I gave it an 8. Passage of time, 5. Costuming, 8. Quality of the script, 6. Accuracy, 4. Storytelling, 5. Production value, 8. Director and production decision making, 7. And do we care? I gave it an 8. I really loved Harriet Tubman, and I loved the way that Cynthia Erivo brought her to life.
I am deeply aware of the irony of me as a white woman criticizing a black female director for giving too much screen time to a white composite character.
That's fair. I felt like my complaints were quibbles, and it's really just it's what I'm worked up about is more the absence of more Harriet Tubman storytelling.
Yeah.
Because we have room for more.
So my average came to 6.65.
Mine came to 6.8.
We're really on the same page this time. So, Harriet, your score came to 6.725, mostly due to the unnecessary presence of Joe Alwyn instead of more interesting stories about Harriet Tubman. Sarah, is there any other stuff you should watch instead that you'd like to recommend?
I mean, not instead. I think people should see this movie. It's a good 101 on Harriet Tubman. I think that this should be, this this movie is kind of a galvanizer in terms of like wanting to learn more about her and different parts of her life. And I think that is what you should look at it as. You should watch this and go peel off and read about other stuff that she did, or watch other things that feature her as a character, because she's a really, really interesting human. And this movie, like, there's just not enough time to get into all of it. I think like use this as an opportunity to go out and do your own research.
And part of why there isn't enough time to get into that is because they wasted on a conflict with Joe Alwyn that didn't happen.
Even if Joe Alwyn wasn't in the movie, if that character wasn't in the movie, there still wouldn't be nearly enough time to get into all of this other stuff that she did.
This movie is worth watching.
Yes.
And I enjoyed watching it. I don't have I can't think of other specific things to like recommend people watch instead.
It's okay. It's been a long ass week.
My God, you're right. Okay, Sarah, can you please take us out?
Of course. If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @Biopic a Podcast Story. So do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. And please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. And if you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about 42, starring Chadwick Boseman as baseball legend Jackie Robinson. R.I.P. Chadwick Boseman, we love you.
Indeed, we do.
Yes, so good night to the cynical and to the earnest, and have a great week, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Good night.